Good evening, listeners, and welcome to the Tuesday show. Now, before we start, last week we had a focus on sport, and so I just wanted to give a quick name check before we get underway this evening to Abu Bakr Ahmed, who is in charge of the Ace Badminton Club, who have just won the Badminton Bangla League. So well done to Abu and all his players, and thank you, Emdad Rahman, for writing an article in East London News about the tournament winners. So don't forget, you can always send us your sports reports. But tonight we are leaving sport a little bit behind, I think, and I'd like to welcome our guest for the evening, who is Councillor Kabir Ahmed. Are you there, Kabir?
Hi, Jenny. How are you?
Oh, never ask that, Kabir. You never get a decent answer. How are you? Well, I'm not even going to ask you how you are. Quite often I say to my guests, have you had a good week? But clearly you have. So you're very welcome on the show. Listeners, if you like to phone into the studio, you can do that. I think the number will come up in a minute. It's, you know it by now anyway. It's 0208 12345 07. There we are. There's the number on the screen, or you can go to the VOD Talk Facebook page and leave a comment on our comments page. So, what was it like, Kabir? How did it feel to win?
Deep sigh of relief. Felt exonerated. I lost by single digits in 2014, so to have won this time around felt great. I think for me, the main thing was winning the trust of the residents of Weavers. They put their faith in me to represent them, and I hope going forward I can sort of serve them well. I think the other most important thing for me was in 2014 there was always a stereotype that Bangladeshi councillors only represent the Bangladeshi community. Well, for myself, I've known you for many years, Jenny, and I've known numerous people over the years, and I have a very diverse grouping of friends. And the vote share in terms of demographics, I think, was a wide range of demographics which supported me. And I think it's important to
Indeed, yeah,
go
to appeal
beyond.
to a wide range. Yes,
That's right.
so
Yeah.
we'll come back to that again, because that is an important point. But let's tell our listeners a little bit about you first. How did you actually first get involved in politics in Tower Hamlets?
Oh, many moons ago. I think it was around sort of turn of the century, if I may say. I did sort of unofficially do various bits of canvassing for Labour Party candidates. Wasn't a member at that time. I think it was around 2006. I became a paid up member of the Labour Party and officially joined. And then I did various activism with the Labour Party, from door knocking to being involved in various different campaigns through various bodies, local ward membership, GC, EC, so on and so forth.
All those boring initials the Labour Party gives us, yes.
Well, for some.
So, I mean, it is interesting, the argument about Bangladeshi members of the Labour Party. In the early 80s, when I showed up in Tower Hamlets, when you were probably still at primary school, but when I showed up, there was that debate about whether Bangladeshi people should join the mainstream parties or establish independent parties, perhaps in the image of parties back in Bangladesh. So that's a debate that's been going on for a long time. So why at that stage, everybody was really flocking to the Labour Party for activism, weren't they? It was just after the attack on Iraq that you came in.
Yeah, partly that, but also I think 2006 saw the win of a number of Respect councillors to the council chambers. I was never involved with Respect as an organisation or a member. I supported the Labour Party at that time from what I perceived to be real from the outside, which was, the social moral code, the values that they represented. Although, like many within the Labour Party at the time, I was against the war on Iraq. And I think there was about 100 or so MPs who voted against it. And it's important to remember that the vote was carried through by support from the Tories, who supported the Labour leadership at the time.
Not for the first time and not for the last, of course.
No.
Yeah.
But I think the positions seem to have reversed now, where the current Labour leadership seem to support a lot of the Tory policies. Yeah, so I'm going to redirect it back to the area of you raised, which was at that time politics was rather volatile, and I thought it's important to have a unified stance. Hence, my membership into the Labour Party, and I honestly did believe of the value systems that it offered at the time. Unfortunately, in terms of roots and experience, it's one thing being a volunteer and supporting and going out in campaigns. It's another thing when you're actually an elected councillor.
When were you first elected to the council, Kabir?
So I was elected in 2010.
In May, in the main elections.
Yeah. And I think we had a double election then.
Oh yes, it coincided with the general election, didn't it?
That's right. Yeah. So I got over 2,000 votes then, and thereafterwards, I think I discovered the dark side of politics that existed, and sort of, I suppose it's best highlighted if somebody wants a read of it with Councillor Purumia's statement, which has come out quite recently. I think it came out yesterday.
Do you think so? I can't make head or tail of that. I read it as well, and I didn't recognise the history at all. But we can agree to disagree on that particular adventure.
I was referring back to the notions of intimidation, notions of bullying that happens within the elected group, notions of caucuses that exist, the in clubs and the out clubs, and how dissenting voices are very marginalised and at times left out of key meetings. But I mean, for me, what really brought the experience to a real distaste was the way how certain fringes of the regional and local leadership treat individuals. So a prime example of that was, this, for me, in terms of my experience, was when there was the selection process for the mayoral candidate within Labour in 2010.
Oh, that was the right saga, wasn't it? Before we get there, I mean, let me just say that obviously there's been a number of battles in the Labour group. Obviously, over the years, I'm just trying to look on the East London News website. I think there's one bit of analysis worth reading, which is Councillor Mark Francis. I probably ruined his career saying this now. He did actually resign as a member of the cabinet in I think it was December 2010. In other words, just after the mayoral election. If you can find it, which sadly I can't at the moment, on the East London News website, I think that again is also worth a read. Sorry, Councillor Francis, I'm sure I've put a halt to all political ambition in the borough for you now. But if I can find the article, I'll put it. I'll put a link on the VOD Talk Facebook page. So yes, the mayoral candidate selection took all summer, as I remember it.
All summer. I suppose it's the Labour way. It takes longer to select the candidate than actually run an election campaign. So, and we've seen it come again and again, where either the regional Labour Party or the NEC somehow come and interfere in the localised processes through one reason or another. So that was the first thing that came to distaste. Now, let me get it clear out there. At that time, I didn't support Lutfur Rahman. I supported another candidate, but that wasn't the point. The point was, after I got elected, it was quite vicious in a way. The way there was a targeted approach to kind of politically assassinate Lutfur Rahman. Now, I wasn't in his camp at the time, so I was privy to some of the individuals, both within and outside the Labour Party, who were trying to orchestrate this. But nonetheless, we had a selection process. He had won the selection process. Thereafterwards, the NEC decided to strip him again.
Without notice. That was
indeed.
That was the thing, wasn't it? Because they had actually received a complaint on, I think it was the 10th of September, and the NEC meeting was, I think, the 22nd, 23rd of September, and they had never put those allegations to Lutfur Rahman, did they? No. So it was a great surprise to him and to me when we found out that the NEC had removed him.
And I think that was just one experience that I can share here, and I don't know how others who were involved in the party at the time felt about it, but nonetheless, he did go on to win as an independent. Then came the next bit, where at the time I think there was 4 independent mayors around the country who had a Labour majority cabinet, but a veto had been put down in which the actual Labour group meeting had taken place in the Houses of Parliament. And we had sort of representatives from London Regional.
Were you there?
Yeah, I was there.
I've spoken about it before, and I've never had an eyewitness guest on.
I'm here.
Hi. Carry on.
Yeah. So then there seemed to be a free line whip of non-cooperation, and the whole ethos of Labour became, for the next 3.5 years or so, we were in opposition politics, and therefore, we had to throw spanners into the works and make everything fail in order to make sure Lutfur fails the next election. And for me, that's not why I came into politics. I came into politics to try to deliver for residents. Although, outwardly it came across, for whatever reasons, that there was a unified Labour Party. Clearly, there wasn't. There were lots of dissenting voices. But again, at one stage, I had a very senior member of London Regional come and approach me and say to me, well, I've heard rumours that you are siding with Lutfur. And this is why Lutfur was actually a Labour Party councillor. Okay. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I don't believe it, of course, but I just want to hear it from your mouth. And I felt, how condescending is that? Is there other people? A certain name you just mentioned a few minutes ago, would they go and ask that individual such questions? And the fact was, no, they wouldn't. So clearly, there was few people identified, and the brass would go and speak to them to put them in line.
Well, there's a few people. I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you just to talk. I managed to find that article and post the link on the Facebook page. But we also have some congratulations coming in. So congratulations on your election from former councillor Mayum Mir. I don't know how to say his new end name, Talukdar. Is that no?
Talukdar. It's always been his name, but he usually shortened it.
I liked it when he shortened it. Mia, I can cope with. I'm going to have lessons on Talukdar. And Tabish Mirza has also sent in congratulations to yourself and to Aspire and to your whole team of supporters, and calls for Labour to be defeated next year. We need to speed up and move on to that. But I think what you were saying there about the attitude in the Labour group and the policing of Labour group group's members' politics is absolutely dynamite. Because a lot of people have heard the one side of the Lutfur Rahman story, which is, he just went and stood as an independent. I mean, one prominent Labour Party right-winger, actually, right-winger, we say, I call him right-winger because it annoys him. But I won't mention his name, but one Labour establishment figure locally said to me, do you know, Jen, I heard that Lutfur wanted to stand as an independent all along. And I just said to him, you are just so wrong. If he wanted to stand as an independent, he wouldn't have gone through court cases to ensure he was on the selection. He wouldn't have shortlisted for the selection. He wouldn't have gone ahead with the vote. He wouldn't have canvassed party members. So anyway, but so people believe all sorts of rubbish, really. And Animal Hassan has just come in just to wish you well as a new councillor as well, and to congratulate you on your victory. Anyway, but so, and look, for all was said in that September, and people who've become active since then don't know this, that his major persuasion in deciding to go ahead and stand as an independent was to uphold the rights of ordinary members of the Labour Party who had selected a candidate and should have that candidate on the ballot paper. That's what he always stressed, and the voters agreed with him. So, but I suppose we're not here just to talk about Lutfur, are we?
Well, just if I can add just one more thing to that, is what the newer members of the Labour Party don't realise is the whole of the left section of the Constitutional Labour Party wholeheartedly supported Lutfur. And that's white working class people who supported Lutfur in both the nomination and possibly the vote as well.
Yes. Yes, it was certainly a mixed bag.
Yeah, so sometimes we forget about that. But
anyway, I was just say Animal Hassan has come in again to state his belief that Lutfur will be the next mayor of Tower Hamlet. So let's give Lutfur that ringing endorsement.
I said that the other day, didn't I?
yeah, you did.
We just got to get him to stand now.
Yeah, just tempt fate, why don't you? Yeah. Okay, let's put Lutfur to one side for a moment and go back to you being a Labour councillor in May 2010. Let's just sort of segue to it a little bit. Just tell us a little bit. That was also in Weavers Ward, the same ward that you represent now. What's that ward like, and what are the sort of key issues there back then and now? Has anything changed?
Well, I think lots has changed in the ward. I think it's always been a very diverse ward with I would say it's a melting pot of sort of cultures, of professions, of classes of people, of housing. So it's always been a very diverse ward. I think for me, going out on the doorsteps, speaking to people, and remember, I mean, my family have had a business there for around 20 years, if not more, and we've sort of seen a diverse range of customers over the years, and talking to people. I think the key issues in the area, the most recent one is around the roadblocks. I mean, the Livable Streets program. I think that's the initial, the one at the front of issues at the moment, but also, the undertone of that is it's related to crime, antisocial behaviour in the area. We don't have good value council services. There are huge cuts have been made.
That's two separate things, isn't it? What I mean, if you're basically saying, without using the words, that the area is getting a bit gentrified. So what is it that leads to the antisocial behaviour? What
Well,
causes that? Where does it manifest itself?
well, parts of it is gentrified, um, but I think the other area, when I'm saying sort of crime and antisocial behaviour, is that crime's gone up in the area. Drug smoking, drug dealing, it's quite rampant in the area. A lot of residents have said to me that the police have given up coming. One particular resident said to me that he called the police. There was drug dealing happening in front of his doorstep, uh, and they said we'll be about an hour. You know how busy it gets in terms of the roads and all of that. So just lock your door and wait behind your door. Others have had people knocking on the door asking for money so they can buy drugs. And these are all responses that residents have given us. I mean, there's been pictures of open drug dealing happening around various areas within Weavers. And it seems like, I mean, during my campaign trail, I've seen police officers get lost. They've gone down Gossett Street and then have had to come back down again on Wellington Row because there's a dead end there that they weren't aware of. That's newly been put up. I bumped into a councillor, Dan Tomlinson, once near one of at the end of Barnet Grove, and I showed him an ambulance, and he said, "Well, we've removed pillars and everything, and this is a better route to get into." But what he didn't take into consideration is that ambulance now has to reverse back out, turn the vehicle around. These are all, seconds, minutes that someone's life, can be lost as a result of
That was around Arnold Circus, wasn't it?
No, this was actually on Wellington Road. There was an ambulance there, and I had like a 5-minute discussion. And then he ran off saying he had a meeting with Sadiq Khan. So I said, remember my name. I introduced myself. But that's just an example. I mean, residents have so many nightmare stories of things that have been happening in the area. And again, for me to put my political boots back on, it was at the bequest of residents in the area who I just because I wasn't a councillor anymore, I still kept in contact with the community, and those who came to me for support and help, I helped them the best I could as a non-councillor individual in the area. So yeah, pretty much. And then you've got other issues around, COVID kind of stopped the nighttime nuisance for a little while, but now it's revving back up again. And again, people have vomit in front of their door, people urinating, leaving rubbish, so on and so forth. And I think it's important that as a local authority, we have planning and licensing departments, and we need to make sure that premises which serve the nighttime economy need to take responsibility for some of these actions of their patrons. We can't just let residents suffer.
Well, this is yes. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I've got a bit of antisocial behaviour driving past the window at the moment. I hope.
And then the other issue is the notion of crumbling buildings and landmarks in the area. So, for example, I mean, there are certain blocks around Weavers that still don't have double glazing. Windows are falling apart, and it needs a major investment. Now, I appreciate. Money's short, there's austerity, but clearly we've got enough money to give loans to other Labour local authorities, £5 million there. We've got enough.
We're loaning out money.
Indeed. And you know what happened to the last soft loan they gave, don't you?
No.
The last one they gave was to Rich Mix.
Oh, the Rich Mix one, yes.
The soft loan. And then when their bigs came in, he wrote off that one. So that was money.
It's like you haven't quite grasped it, have you? You lend money to somebody and then they pay you back. What John did was somebody else had lent money, or he had lent money to Rich Mix, and then he paid it back.
John hadn't lent the money, but it was a Labour administration who lent money, which was a soft loan. First time I heard of it was when I was a councillor. didn't know soft loans existed.
And
I'm sure
I think a
many
lot of
residents could do with a soft loan.
absolutely. And I think one of the other elements of that controversy was there was a lot of Labour Party members on the board of Rich Mix at the
Indeed,
time. And if you
indeed.
think as well over like the commissioners coming in and scrutinising the council, and there's accountants scrutinising how Lutfer Rahman ran the finances of the borough for 6 months without finding anything to prosecute him on. What I've never got my head around is the commissioners insisted there be an open and transparent grant giving policy. So how can a mayoral candidate promise in a manifesto to give money to an organisation, in this case Rich Mix, and call that adequately fair and transparent with the criteria? It was in his manifesto that he was going to give them that grant, and then he became mayor and did give them that grant.
Well, rather than going on the grants, I think my issue is around the, there are numerous grants processes, but I mean, I don't want to focus on the grants themselves because they're grants, but a loan is something that you lend and you get back.
Well, essentially, that's what he gave them a grant in order to repay the loan, didn't he? That was essentially.
No, I think the if I'm correct, I think the soft loan was written off. And
is your neck of the woods?
Yeah,
your neck of the woods.
Indeed,
what happened.
Indeed. So,
well, we must catch up with some of these messages coming in on the comments box. My own Mia has been at it again, commenting again, and he says that he wants to hear more from you about your priorities for Weavers, which is why I was pleased we were talking about what we were. And I think that should really answer Mayum's question a bit. And also Tabish Mirza has suggested that we try to bring back a dealer a day. That was a policy which, again, Mayor Lutfer Rahman started, and the police and the council had a target of working together to apprehend at least one drug dealer a day. And that was the target that was met, I think, every year this policy was in operation. Now we have Operation Continuum, don't we? Which does occasionally report that it's made various raids. So it's not that drug dealing has been abandoned, fighting the fight against it. But it perhaps, I don't know, not as headline. What do you think the best? Do you think it's worth bringing back a dealer a day?
I think it's very important, and remember, when we talk about a dealer a day, we're not just talking about the runners and those who are just doing low key dealing. We're talking about the bigger players here. The real suppliers here. They're the ones we're talking about. Essentially, those who are profiting mostly, usually the runners are usually users themselves. And what happens is that's a way of them skimming off the top in order to sustain their habit. So you're talking about the main players who are involved in the supply of Class A drugs. And again, when we talk about dealer a day, we were focusing on the heavier drugs, the Class A drugs, as opposed to the Class B drugs. So I think it would be a very appropriate policy to bring back. I think other things are also focused around treatment and also things around outreach work. A lot of sort of prostitution is associated, or soliciting is associated with drug using as well. And a lot of the women who are involved are also victims of both domestic violence and being abused by their pimps. And again, when we were in office, we provided lots of funds in order to support these women to get out of the lifestyle that a lot of them were forced into, and essentially, have what we describe as normal, healthy lives. So that's around the drugs. But there are numerous examples of how we provided funding in order to tackle issues around drugs and the crime associated with drugs. I think other areas.
Yeah, can I just say that who is it? Abdul Mirza has also said he wants to hear your priorities. So I hope that he's enjoying your your detailed explanation. I think we've got that.
So if I can give the priorities in a nutshell first, and then we can deconstruct, each of those areas if need be.
And just to cheer you up, Linda Wilkinson has also written in to support a dealer a day, and she said, Kabir knows this, that drug dealing goes on all day. Kabir knows this. Some presents would be good. He's a breath of honesty, she says. So don't send in comments like that, because he's very shy, Kabir, very bashful. So you'll just embarrass him live on air.
I've started going red already.
Yeah, I knew you would. So yes, and Tabish Mirza comes back a bit to the Labour Party as well, and he says personally he doesn't support Labour anymore, not since they expelled Jeremy Corbyn. I don't think they've actually expelled him. They've withdrawn the whip, so he in the House of Commons. So he's still an MP, but not a Labour MP at the moment. And there are hopes that he will be brought back very soon, although obviously expelling Ken Loach is not a good sign, is it? So yes, he no longer supports Labour after what they did to JC and the attack they're waging on the left, but he says he does support Aspire in Tower Hamlets. So there we are, he's made his choices in that way. What I wanted to put to you was sort of quite a difficult one. You've mentioned a lot about Weavers. So let me ask you another thing first. Which landlords do you have in Weavers? Is it a lot of Tower Hamlets homes landlords? Does anybody else figure?
Majority of the properties are owned by, managed by Tower Hamlets Homes. I think we've got Spitalfield Housing. They've got a small cohort of properties. Tower Hamlets Community Housing have also got a small cohort of properties, but by far it's Tower Hamlets Homes which has the bulk of properties within Weavers.
And that sort of leads us on to the bigger question I was going to ask you, which might be a bit difficult to answer, which is, obviously you are one of two Aspire councillors. So you will have a little Aspire group, same size as the Tory group.
I think the Tories aren't a group anymore. Councillor Andrew Wood has become independent, if I'm correct.
No, he's put a foot in each camp.
Okay.
What he's done is he's resigned from the Conservative Party as an individual member, but he's still a Conservative. He's an independent councillor in the Tory group. So that they have two councillors, which is the minimum for forming a group. So that allows Councillor Peter Golds to continue being the leader of a group. And I'm sure leading Andrew can only be a joy. Anyway, so but as an individual councillor, just a backbench councillor, what can you actually do? You're identifying the issues, but what can you do? Do you think John Biggs will listen to you? I mean, it wasn't a good start at the count, but do you think he will listen to you?
Well, I mean,
he never has before. But...
No, clearly not. What I have said to all residents is that I will be that dissenting voice. It will be noted. It will be in the chambers. Okay. Ignorance is bliss when you've got your head in the sand and not listening to any views, but that view will be put up there. In terms of resident issues directly related to services, that's not a John Biggs decision. That's about service delivery of council or housing association or ALMO services. And that's where I can hold officers to account, where repairs aren't being done on time, where issues related to their service delivery isn't being completed correctly. So that's something that any councillor can do. Having the mayor is helpful on your side, but just because you don't have a mayor on your side, you could still be opposition councillor and nonetheless hold officers to account. So in relation to the day-to-day issues. I mean, where constituents complain about bins not being collected, recycling not being collected, that's officers will be held to account. That's not, something that John Biggs has to address personally, although he is overall responsibility for the borough's delivery of services. I can address that directly with officers through their service heads or corporate directors, so on and so forth.
Well, Shua Malik has come on to say Labour is failing the people of this borough and leaving many of the people, especially those at the bottom, behind. I'll come back to Shua in a minute. He was last week's guest talking about sport, but I will say a shout out for one policy that happened under John Biggs' administration, which Councillor David Edgar saw through just before he left the cabinet, and that is the bringing back in-house of the waste disposal service, and it's something more down my end of the borough. I used to have dreadful trouble going into the civic amenity centre with large bits of recycling or things I couldn't put in the Paladins on the estate, and it was always dreadful. I'd always have a row. Poor David Edgar, I used to follow him around saying, do you know what happened to me now at the last visit? And he'd get his little notebook out and he'd sigh and he'd say, oh, I hear so much about this. Anyway, there wasn't a great deal of progress. But now, going to the recycling centre, I'm always looking for things to recycle. It is one of the few council services that is just absolutely a joyous spick and span down there and in the amenity centre in Yabsley Street. And the people who work there are so helpful. It's really nice. I had to tell the first one, I've never had anybody be nice to me here before, so it's a huge lot better. So I hope you can get something up at your end of the borough to get those refuse collections going better. Sorry, it's your show, not mine.
No problem. Just on David Edgar, I've got to say, if he's not listening, I suppose I'll just convey it to him. I'd like to consider David a friend. I think he's an honourable politician. I have a lot of time for David, as well as his wife is also Stephanie Eaton, former Liberal councillor. And I think he is a humble man. He's not an egotistical individual. And just from a personal point of view, I have a lot of respect for him. And I think he's a very talented individual. So that's David.
David and I have had a wide-ranging relationship over the years. Sometimes we've agreed, and sometimes we haven't, as David will be the first to say. I haven't yet forgiven him for selling my house, my flat, to one housing group I've now had 3 floods in the space of some school summer holidays, which is too much. But I believe he's a Southampton supporter. I'm not sure if that's really endears him to the local community, but there we are. So on that note, sport. We were talking last week about the demise of Tower Hamlets Youth Sports Foundation and the lack of sport in the borough. What's your favourite sport? What do you turn the telly on to watch?
Oh my God, you don't want to go into that. Well, when I was younger, I used to play a lot of volleyball.
Yeah.
And played in the London Youth Games and sort of at various different levels, at regional level and so on and so forth. But in terms of watching, football, of course, is a sport that most people my age, I'm getting old now, but are quite driven in Tower Hamlets. Also, I watch cricket. I watch most sports, to be honest. I'm one of those people, unfortunately, this Olympic, unfortunately, this Olympic was taken over by the election campaign, but usually during the Olympics, I'm glued to the TV to watch it.
I mean, do you think proper sports provision for young people is part of the answer to that antisocial behaviour that we were talking about at the start?
Well, when we talk about, automatically we're kind of labelling younger people in doing this, and I think part of the antisocial behaviour isn't necessarily younger people. It's a mixture of ages who contribute to the antisocial behaviour. But in relation to younger people, I think shutting down the majority of youth centres in Tower Hamlets hasn't helped. I believe about 18 youth centres got shut down. There's the youth, I feel, these days don't have any constructive places to go to, safe places to go to, and therefore may potentially contribute to what we may label as antisocial behaviour, but I don't want to bracket them as the sole cause of antisocial behaviour. I think sports is a way of curtailing some who may be inclined towards antisocial behaviour. Again, it's a wide differing definition of what antisocial behaviour is. But from my days when I was younger, we were very focused on after school clubs, youth centres, and we spent our time trying to be proactive in whatever sports we did. I was quite fortunate. I accessed Shadwell Basin and I did things like sailing, even powerboating, canoeing, played football, volleyball, cricket. So, from primary school, we were playing cricket. So I did a wide range of sports, and it was a way sort of deter away from vices of society as such.
I'm sure you didn't watch last week's programme because you would have been out in the last throes of the campaign, but do give it a watch. And anyone else listening, because Sure has come up with some very good suggestions, and a very good rationale for why we've got to bring youth sports back and get the value from them. And I think we might take that up as a bit of a campaign. So if you'd like to
indeed.
join us, that would be great. So thank you for that. Right, we're beginning to come to the end of our time. So what else can we say? I don't want to put you on the spot and just get you speculating, but
someone asked about what my priorities were. So I published it in my leaflet. So the first was around the Livable Streets programme, and it's put an immediate halt on it. It's really not working. And funny thing is, while I've been speaking to residents, and I won't say which political party, but certain individuals representing certain political parties have been trying to cause divisions between residents, saying, certain residents who may be more affluent, they're the ones who want it, others living on the other side of the road. But the fact is, residents from both sides of the road, majority of the residents from both sides of the road don't want it. Yet they've been playing one off against the other, which I think is very divisive politics. So that was the top priority. And I had a longer speech prepared, but as Mr. Biggs walked out and was not willing to listen, I'll try to finish the rest of the speech in the council chamber. So the second issue was around tackling of crime and antisocial behaviour. The third was around bringing back good value services from the council, which includes Wheels on Meals, the day-to-day stuff, making sure people's bins are cleaned, rubbish collected, having more youth provisions. Closing youth clubs didn't help that clearly. Also having more sports programs through schools or after school clubs, supporting people's education. These are constructive forums that kids can go to. Also, it was around the nightlife nuisance, protecting residents against that. And again, this can be clearly implemented through your licensing objectives, putting more ownership on establishments. And again, I'm not against the nighttime economy, but if a business is profiting from patrons, then the business needs to take responsibility, particularly in supporting the residents who may live across the road, only a few yards away. And then lastly, it was around sort of having a program to restore, our crumbling landmarks and public realm, which include, in the 21st century, there are still council-owned, council-owned or landlord-managed properties that don't have double glazing.
Mm.
Window panes are falling off. So there's numerous issues around this stuff, and
Well, perhaps we might need to ask Tower Hamlets Homes if they would come on the show to talk a bit about their current programme. I don't know if they would be allowed to do it.
But again, the infrastructure, the money, Tower Hamlets Homes are the management organisation. So, the money that it will take will have to come from the landlords, which is Tower Hamlets Capital.
I think the system certainly was. I don't know if it's changed, but it certainly was up until at least 2 or 3 years ago, that Tower Hamlets Council would pay Tower Hamlets Homes a flat rate management fee. And what was never clear to me was Tower Hamlets Council just passing on the rent and the service charges so that Tower Hamlets Homes would have the same income as any other landlord would, because all these registered social landlords or whatever was alternative providers, whatever we call them at the moment, they essentially have to manage on tenants' rents, leaseholders' service charges, and very little else. The occasional sort of rent from a few shops if they've got some or something like that. The odd grant if they can get it, for a little bit of this or that. So I never did get to the bottom of, was this management fee more, less, or the same as another landlord would have? And I'd love to get to the bottom of that. But I do remember in a former life, 4 or 5 years ago, talking to Tower Hamlets Homes about their spending around Brick Lane, where the nighttime economy was causing so many problems. And eventually they came up with this idea of, we're going to have caretakers come in and sweep up on the estates at the back of Brick Lane on Saturdays and Sundays. Well, great, that's where we were 20 years ago, before everything went wrong. So it would be very interesting to hear from them what their programme is now. I think, to be honest, I think that they did have a capital programme, which may or may not have been adequately funded. And a lot of it was hit by Grenfell, because Grenfell, you can be superficial about Grenfell and say, oh, let's audit the borough, make sure we don't have any buildings with cladding. But it's much, much more than that. It's the issue of fire safety. And there were things like, I know it's not your ward exactly, it's Spitalfields, but in Pauline House, it really came obvious that some of the leaseholders didn't want to have decent fire doors, front doors. It's a tower block for people who don't know, and there's 4 flats on each floor, and each flat has got a front door, which is supposed to be a really good fire door. And if a leaseholder won't pay the money and put a fire door on, particularly if it's an absentee leaseholder, it means that the whole of that floor is compromised by a lack of fire safety. So there were all these sort of little issues. And I think, and then of course, Tower Hamlets Homes were finally sort of giving those details some real attention. And then of course, COVID came, and we seem to always get the old issues knocked to one side by the next emergency happening. So I think we really need some local people to really sit down with Tower Hamlets Homes officers and really get to grips with what is actually happening on the ground myself. So sorry, that's another rant from me. But you've given us a good overview of what you're trying to do. What other viewers may not have realised is that, although it is again covered on East London News, as you gave your, I thought, very gracious speech, when you won, and you won by a huge amount. But when you said, you thanked the returning officer, the electoral services, your supporters, your family, everybody. And then immediately afterwards, you expressed your condolences to the late councillor John Pearce, who died very suddenly, and that's why we had the by-election. And I thought that again was very gracious and not divisive. And it's sort of whatever. It's important, I think, to say as well that the Labour candidate who didn't win this time, it's no real reflection on her. Obviously, she was not the favoured candidate of the electors, but really, it's not a comment on her capabilities as such. It's a difficulty that any Labour candidate would have had in Weavers Cllr. But anyway, as you were saying, your piece, John Biggs had been standing at the back, and he turned around and just walked out. I think it was when you said, really, the voters want the mayor, John Biggs, to listen to what they're saying, and he turned around and walked out, which was sort of doubly insulting. How did you feel when you saw his back receding into the distance?
Well, I should be used to it by now, to be honest. I mean, most people who have worked with Mayor Biggs or have proposed ideas to Mayor Biggs have usually responded with him. He just won't listen. I think one of my constituents, I can say that now, I'm a councillor, during a meeting in Weavers, got told to hush up, or actual words were shut up. They'll know who they are. So nonetheless, being in politics doesn't mean you need to be,
authoritarian.
Well, no, I mean, you can be authoritarian, but you can still be polite. Authoritarian, but polite. But nonetheless, I mean, my whole approach to politics is one of representation. My whole campaign was done on a positive campaign. It was about who I am. It was about the values I have. It was about what I wanted to represent. And it was about, my key ethos around, particularly sort of as a councillor, is about you're elected as a councillor, as an individual, to represent the residents of the area you're elected for. You may belong to a party, but nonetheless, you still have to be a voice for those people. You can't ignore those people. Now, unfortunately, the Labour campaign was very much focused on myself, which I didn't have a problem with, to be honest, because I had Lutfur Rahman's picture along with Lil Collins and myself on the front of my leaflet. So, to remind people that I was Lutfur Rahman's candidate, I had no problem with that. But I would think that they've wasted valuable space not promoting their own candidate or their own policies.
I mean, the policy of sort of the hate policy, I will call it that, towards Lutfur Rahman.
I'll call it the politics of division, to be honest, or fear-mongering. I mean, it worked in 2010, I believe, or, it worked in 2006 to win the Liberal seats in the Bow areas because of their campaign against respect. But I think we're kind of 15, 16 years on. And I think, the architects of that, certain number of them are still involved, and they just need to grow up in politics, to be honest.
Yes, I mean, it just hit me hard. I mean, you've told us about what it was like looking at the first 4 months of Lutfur Rahman's administration from inside the Labour group. But I remember sitting in the council chamber, and the hate, the vitriol, that came from the Labour benches. It was almost spitting venom, with anger. And it was never a good look. And
I have to correct you on that, Jenny.
Okay.
There was a cohort of the leadership who had that venom.
Yes.
A number of us actually believed that, irrelevant of who the mayor was. Now, let's put things into context. When Boris was London mayor, Tory, Kate Hoey was one of his advisors, who was a Labour MP, and that was perfectly okay. Over in, I'm trying to recall back the other independent mayors. It's gone. But we had a number of other independent mayors in the country at that time. Doncaster, I believe. Yeah, Doncaster.
Was it Hartlepool?
Hartlepool, Doncaster. The majority of the cabinet members working with the independent mayor were Labour councillors. Now,
and ironically, in Newham, the majority of people in Robin Wales's cabinet were not Labour councillors.
No,
at least to begin with.
No, to begin with, but then I think they took the whole council. But nonetheless, I mean, there is a history of whoever the mayor is. I mean, Ken Livingstone is another independent mayor who had a Labour administration working with him, as London mayor. So there is a history of whoever the mayor is. If you want, and I always argued while I was within the Labour group that we should be there to have Labour policies driven within the council. But there was a caucus, a cohort of individuals, all they had was venom. And to be honest, that's not the politics that I'm involved in. And all those who will associate with me or come into contact with me, irrelevant of their political ideologies, I mean, I will try my best to represent them as fairly as possible. There are, of course, some policies which I will endorse and support, and I will support, as I said. But nonetheless, if it's on individualized issues, I will, represent them, irrelevant of whatever their political creed may be. If they voted for me or they haven't voted for me, it doesn't make a difference. I am one of the elected councillors. I'm not sure where the other one is. I've seen his number of casework, and I could find it quite shocking, to be honest. But nonetheless, he stood on a political card, and therefore he had a block vote automatically generated. For me, every vote I get is every vote that I have to go on canvass for, and hopefully, I've got 9 months to prove myself to my residents. If I can satisfy them, then I'll get re-elected. If not, then I'll still be in the area, and I've said to people I'll be happy to continue to work with them, irrelevant of being a councillor or not a councillor.
Well, I think you're going to be a very busy councillor for the next 9 months, because there is so much to do. But I think that's a really good note to end on for this first introductory interview. And I hope you will come back and talk to us again about Weavers Ward and about the borough-wide issues that you encounter from being on the council. Because whatever's happening in Weavers, maybe that people in other places are experiencing the same troubles, and we need to bring them together. So I hope this won't be the last. Just one final comment. Tavish Mirza says that it's been a really good show. It's the first time he's seen it. And he's suggested that it's always nice when people give you suggestions of guests you can have in the future. But he's actually asked to look for Rahman as a guest. So I hope Kabir seem to know him. You're going to be seeing him over the next few weeks.
I would certainly endorse that as well. So okay. if he does decide to come,
we'll give him a nudge, and let's see if we can get him on at some point. And of course, we've always said, you wouldn't necessarily know, but we've always said, we're very pleased to see John Biggs or any of the Labour councillors on here as well, perhaps defending some of the policies that have been controversial. So thank you, Tabish Mirza, for that request. You see that's one of the first things that Councillor Ahmed is going to do is convey that message to look for Rahman, and we'll see what happens in the future. But I hope we will see you again, Kabir. And finally, just congratulations once again, and good luck with it all. I'm sure you'll be very busy. Thank you for coming on the show. So,
thank you, Jenny. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yeah, very welcome here. Right, with no further ado, that's it. Dear viewer, join us again next Tuesday for another edition of the Tuesday Show. Good night.